All right, welcome to another episode of Blazin, Grazin, and Other Wild Things. Glad to have everybody back. I think today we're going to talk a little bit about turkeys. And Mark, you're going to lead us off with all that good information.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we, obviously sitting here at the end of May, we're kind of at the end of most turkey seasons across the country are wrapping up, or most have really already finished. Here in Oklahoma, we've been done for a couple weeks. Of course, caught a bunch of nice weather days right after the season goes out, so that's how that typically goes. But yeah, so there's a lot of people interested in turkey management and thinking about why turkey populations might have declined a little bit over the past few decades, and how populations are doing now. And certainly there's been a lot of research that's been ongoing both in Oklahoma and elsewhere, really throughout the country, on turkey populations and what's going on with turkeys. So thought it'd be a timely topic for this time of year and something we can talk about.
You bet, especially now we got. Their turkeys are nesting. Also, turkeys are roaming around with poults right now. I've had several people that I know talking about it, even in western Oklahoma and even around here, around central part of the state, talking about they've seen hens with little poults running around already. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, poults certainly should be hitting the ground right now, and certainly a lot already have. And that really, I think is a good place to start us out, because a lot of what I think we've seen going on with turkeys, there's a lot of focus on nesting, and nesting does matter for sure. I mean, having better nesting cover for better nesting success is good, but I think we have enough data to show that, or at least to suggest that, nest survival may have gone down a little bit, but it certainly hasn't taken a nosedive, during the time period that we've seen turkey populations start to decline. But brood survival, on the other hand, is pretty dang low. And so I think there's a lot to be said about focusing management efforts on increasing survival of poults, because again, you want to have nest hatch, but if all the poults die after the eggs hatch, then you're really not doing anything to help the population out at that point.
Yeah, and that's the nest survival has been a big topic for the last several years.
Yes,
I think that's been a big
well, that's
part.
the one people always focus on, and it's I think there's a good logical reason. You can't have poults if you don't have a successful nest. But we're usually, most studies are sitting around 20 to 30% nest success, which certainly it'd be great to see at 40%, but what we don't see is many studies with very great brood survival. Usually we're sitting around 30 to 40% brood survival.
So is there I know we've got the ongoing studies and stuff that you're a part of, and here in Oklahoma, we're fortunate we've got split populations. We have Rios and Easterns. Is there any differences in the nest survival between the Rios and the Easterns? Are you seeing anything different, or is it similar?
I'm not sure on the data from that work. That's still kind of ongoing, being led by a team of folks here. But I do think that in general, Easterns, especially in the southeastern U.S., are probably doing the worst out of any turkey subspecies, with Rios on average tending to do a little bit better. And I think a lot of that really comes down to availability of cover for reproduction. So having, you think about western Oklahoma, what's limiting for turkeys there a lot of the time is roosting cover, both from cottonwoods and some of those drainages, losing those trees through wildfire and other events and not seeing regeneration, but then also roosting cover becoming unavailable because it's encroached by cedar and other woody species. And so I think you kind of see that being more of a limiting factor there, whereas in a year with decent rainfall, if a hen can lay a nest, she can likely find a good place to lay a nest, and she can then raise those poults. Because again, in western Oklahoma, in years with good rainfall and a lot of those grassland systems, you've got a bunch of forb coverage, you have adequate bare ground, and so brood survival there, on average across studies, is probably going to be better than a lot of the places in the southeast, both southeastern Oklahoma and the southeastern U.S. in general. where we see hens pretty commonly, hatch their eggs and then take off and cover literally, a half mile to a mile in the first day. That's not a good recipe for having poult survive when they're, really, really tiny and having to go that far. They're all dying. I mean, they're all dead on day one. And so if we can, what that to me is saying is that if they're having to go that far, it means that there's not good brooding cover close to where that nest was hatched. And so we just need to have more of it across the landscape.
Yeah.
What do you think is limiting the brood cover the most?
Yeah, so in most places, it really comes down to a lack of, open communities dominated by forbs. And so having a little bit of grass is fine, but you really want, either, and again, it looks different places, right? So it could be in a grassland system, something that was burned, within the last year or so, maybe something that was grazed as well, had a good flush of forb cover, that with relatively openness at ground level, some bare ground there so that the poults can maneuver, but you also have a good height of plants up to about knee high, knee to waist high, such that the poults have cover, but then the hen can also look above that cover. So that can look different in different places. In the southeastern U.S., we'd often, or even in southeastern Oklahoma, we might think of either really low basal area, open pine stands that are getting frequent fire. Could also think of, openings that we've created that, are use fire or disking to maintain. But, I mean, you look at the landscape now, and in a lot of places, just driving down the road, there's not that many openings that are dominated by forbs. And I think across much of the U.S., that's really limiting turkey populations.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, because again, a lot of times, a lot of forb cover is related to the amount of bare ground, and that amount of bare ground can be related to utilization by livestock, cattle grazing. And part of it, what we're seeing too is cattle numbers are down. Again, with cattle prices, it's hard for people to restock and to build up herds and stuff. But also, we have a lot of absentee landowners anymore too that are buying for recreational purposes, and they're not putting livestock on their property for doing that. And so, I think we've got a lot of areas that's just not getting grazed, and it's getting heavy mulch, heavy thatch, or litter on it, and we're just not seeing a lot of that. And those aren't conducive good for turkey or even quail, especially for brood rearing on that, because it's just hard to get around. And then we're lacking that forb cover.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, sometimes, there's folks push for grazing management where you're trying to make it a grass monoculture, whether it's a planted to one species or it's just native, but they're trying to push it to have the thickest, densest grass cover.
Yep.
And the reality is that isn't ideal for lots of wildlife.
Right.
And so this idea that I just want the thickest grass with no broadleaf plants, that's an idea that we have to get around and help folks understand that you can have all sorts of forbs growing mixed in with your grasses that aren't competing strongly. They have a completely different root system, a taproot versus a fibrous root system, and they can still be there without taking resources away from your grasses. Especially in the southeast part of the state gets so much rain. The competition issue isn't for soil moisture, it's for light. And so I think people they start thinking about these plants are competing for things, but that's not always true.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then broadcast herbicide applications. You can use grazing to make it more diverse, but then if you just go in there and broadcast herbicide everything, of course you're taking away all of those insect attracting plants and all of those seed producing plants that are awesome. And the idea that that's a benefit to the land, it's not true in most cases. Usually, most of the time, if you got a lot of a really, really heavy forb canopy, it's more indicative of a stocking rate issue than it is that these plants are just taking over, unless it's an invasive species like we have some. But
that flush of broomweed isn't because you didn't spray it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, broomweed occurs for two reasons. One, it's because we're just coming out of a drought or we're in a drought and
Yeah.
you got a lot of bare ground. Or secondly, you've overutilized it. You've grazed it down. You continually graze it down, and broomweed likes bare ground. It has to overwinter as a rosette, and it's got to have sunlight.
Yeah.
And that's why it occurs. And
Yeah, but it's, I mean, obviously, you wouldn't want, to have your whole property full of it, but having some areas with a little bit of that, I mean, that the structure of it is great in terms of having that, umbrella-like structure where you just have a single stem, with the plant overhead. So, I mean, having some areas like that are really going to be helpful for turkeys as well as, I mean, you mentioned quail also.
Yeah, and I think, if you're thinking about, how do I manage stuff to get forbs and to do that, grazing is definitely one way to help within that. And I think stuff that we've worked on, again, showing that, burning in the spring, burning is great and doing that. But if you continually burn in the spring, you are going to see reduction in forb numbers because that does benefit warm season native grasses. That's what it does. So thinking about doing some growing season burns, some, June, July, August, September, even October, even actually all the way into December, though I don't consider those dormant season or growing season burns are more dormant, but that early dormant season, what we've seen is really good numbers of forbs later that next summer. And so again, to help benefit that, even if you're not grazing and stuff within that, that's the way to do that, is changing up, your burning regime on a property. And, I wouldn't burn the whole place. It depends on size, scales important. But again, that patch burning concept, burning portions of an area at different seasons to give all kinds of different stuff, will definitely benefit, I think, those brooding, nesting, and all phases of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, to think about, kind of taking a step back, a lot of places, I mean, if you're in a native system, great, but a lot of places do have introduced grasses. And, certainly the structure of most native grasses compared to non-native grass, I mean, you got way more problems if you have non-native grasses. So certainly whether old world bluestem, fescue, certainly taking time to remove those from any openings where you're trying to have brooding cover. Because if you get down on the ground and look at the structure of those, it is just thick and dense, regardless of what you do with other treatments. So eliminating those, having either native pastures or native areas that, you're just managing for, for wildlife, is really going to be a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Mark, why don't we talk a little bit about like what the options are if you did have fescue, say, and you were thinking about trying to make that better for broods. Yeah.
Fescue is a super easy one. Some of the warm season non-native grasses we have problems with, you're going to ding up the plant community when you control it, because obviously the time that it's growing is the same as the time that most of your desirable forbs would be. But with fescue, you can just simply prepare the field sometime in the early fall by either grazing it is one of the better ways to do it, or burning it. You could also mow it a couple of times. But basically you just want to stimulate active growth of the plant and make sure that the plants are, growing and healthy, and there's not a bunch of thatch that's on the ground that's going to prevent herbicide contact. And then just simply going in right after first frost with 2 quarts of the acre of glyphosate. That works great. Great, easy, single-time treatment, and you can see excellent results in terms of reducing coverage with one treatment down to say 5% or so.
Yeah, and then you can just spot spray if you need
exactly
to.
Exactly.
As things, if a little bit comes back or got missed or whatever.
Yeah.
So what if you've got fescue scattered in an area?
Yeah.
With native.
Yeah.
Would the spring burning? I know. Spring burning on fescue is tough because it's actively growing on a solid stand. But where it's scattered in areas, I think you can also do that late winter, early spring burning, and again benefit the warm season natives within that. Yeah,
and the other thing too that's nice with fescue is, I mean, again, you can really go in there any time in the winter And I mean, you can use glyphosate. You could also use a mazapic. You know, if you wanted something with a little bit more selectivity, and either spot spray or even broadcast treat with either of those. I mean, if you've got decent coverage when everything else is dormant and all you've got is the fescue actively growing, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
and and again, when you move into the warm season, non-native grasses, you start having more problems like Bermuda grass. Yeah, you're going to ding the plant community up because you're probably going to have to use a mazapir for best results.
But if it's Bermuda, there might not be a whole lot else in
exactly,
there.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the situation.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Yeah. And it's going to look like a moonscape for the rest of that summer. But then the next year, you'll start to see some natives popping up. And, you know, I think it kind of is what it is. Unfortunately, those warm season non-native grasses are, you're going to have a year that basically that it's not good, but it wasn't good before, so you're not really losing anything.
Yeah. And you could always do part.
Yeah.
Do part of your property that way or part of your pasture, whatever, and give yourself time. And I think it's interesting because fescue, of course there's toxic issues with fescue, and not all, but the endophyte infected fescue for sure. And so we are getting more requests on, other options for cool season forages to incorporate. And, maybe in the future, hopefully there will be some more native cool seasons that are included in some of these seed mixes and stuff. But yeah, like especially with animals that don't graze on fescue a lot, you can have all sorts of issues, particularly once they put the seed head on, because of course the seed head is the most toxic part. Yeah. So then when you see all these cows in the ponds in, June, and you're like, it's not that hot, right? Well, it is for them because they're experiencing toxicosis. So they're trying to cool off. But anyway, there's reasons to not have fescue for cattle too, I guess is my point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the fescue issue is certainly in the eastern part of the state, and I mean, a great number of places that I've worked previously is like one of the number one easiest things somebody wanting to improve their property for wildlife can do is just kill off the fescue. And even if they did nothing else from then, obviously at some point they're going to have to burn it or do something to maintain it. But those open plant communities dominated by forbs are really limiting to a lot of wildlife species. But yeah, and the other thing to me that I think a lot of people overlook with turkeys is the negative effects that woody encroachment has had in a lot of places. I mentioned earlier, thinking about roosting, and that's a really obvious, visible one of like, okay, we used to have turkeys here, a bunch of cedars grew up, and then maybe a wildfire came through and killed all the trees. Well, that's pretty obvious. But even if you used to have turkeys using an area, now you don't, and you walk in there and there's a bunch of cedars, well, yeah, that makes sense why they wouldn't use that anymore. But what I think a lot of people overlook is that same thing happens in other systems, the cross timbers all the way down to southeastern part of the state. I mean, honestly, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, that's going on. It's different species in different places though, and it's at a different scale, right? So, in western Oklahoma, we think about, okay, woody encroachment is, cedars growing up underneath cottonwoods, forcing turkeys out. But in the cross timbers, the same thing's going on. We have cedars that are growing in cross timbers forest, and granted, there's more places here for turkeys to roost, so it's not going to be as obvious. But I think those subtle effects over time, you start to see decreased use of areas, and certainly one of the things that a lot of people overlook with turkeys is the importance of hen survival. And hens are most vulnerable whenever they're on the nest during incubation. And we have some pretty good data to show that, certainly they oftentimes will nest around some sort of shrub or, some sort of woody plant. But areas that have, extensive coverage of woody plants, you see decreased hen survival. And that's a huge issue for the population because if we don't have good hen survival, we're not going to have, even if nest success is great, you can't make up for the fact that they're only living a couple years. And so that woody encroachment issue, I think, is a huge deal with turkeys that a lot of people are kind of overlooking. Obviously, it's a lot of issues for a lot of other, land management objectives, but I think people overlook it for turkeys sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely. My son and I were actually just talking about that this weekend on his place, around the area where he lives at. He's gone in and did a bunch of cedar work because they had a lot of large cedars. This area when he'd bought it, I think he's had it about 7 years now, and there was a few turkeys on this place and around the area, but he's definitely gone in, done more burning, definitely controlled a lot of cedars and stuff along. He's got a creek that runs through it, and I think they overwintered this year about 100 turkeys on that place around that area. And and we were talking about that he said he goes I swear it's it's got to be that, and because you talk about it's roosting areas that you're opening that back up, so they're wanting to come in and utilize it. You're opening up areas where you're getting better food sources doing that, and then you're also helping survivability within that, because also predators use that for cover. Turkeys can't see, so they're gonna avoid it altogether. Or they're gonna get whacked out there.
Exactly.
And so by doing that, and I've heard so many other success stories about people, especially removing cedars and stuff from underneath roost trees that were historic roost trees, been around for a long time, always turkeys. Turkeys gone away, and then they remove all that stuff, and within weeks those turkeys are back in those areas because they like it. There's something that's habitat. That's where they live at, and doing that, and I think that's a huge part of it. Going back to the brood success, talking about that, like we said earlier, the nest success was always been talked about lately, and going back to the predator issue, that's always talked about. There's not a lot of successful research that shows that predators are it, but there's a lot of anecdotal stuff on predator control for nest survivability. Is predators an issue with the brood survivability?
Yeah, certainly. So brood survival, broods, poults die from lots of things. They're very small, very vulnerable for about the first 2 weeks of life. They can't even, roost in trees. So the poults and the hen actually are on the ground for that first 2 weeks of life. So very vulnerable for the poults, very vulnerable for the hen as well. During that time frame, a lot of both carnivore and avian, mesocarnivore, mesomammalian predators, as well as avian predators are targeting and eating poults. But you also have issues with things like exposure that people don't think about necessarily. But you get a bunch of rainfall and they get wet and they can't thermoregulate. That's certainly an issue. On the flip side of that, though, if we get some really hot days, it can be a real issue with having their ability to cool down. And I've got a good colleague, Marcus Lashley at the University of Florida. He actually has a captive turkey research facility, wild turkey research facility, where they're imprinting poults to see the effects of different management on poult survival and poult growth rates and things like that. Because if we can get poults to grow faster and say they can fly up in the tree at 12 days or 11 days as opposed to 14 or 15 days, well, they're more likely to live. And so
is that how early they can
fly up about 2 weeks. They can fly up in a tree.
Wow,
they grow incredibly fast.
Amazing. I didn't know that.
Yep. And that's why they need to, their diet during that first couple weeks, or really first month or two, is, so heavy on insects, because they've got to have high protein to be able to support that growth rate.
Wow.
But anyway, one of the things that's been really interesting that he's seen and talked about a lot is the effects of temperature on the foraging rate. So oftentimes when we think of thermoregulation, we think about they're getting too cold because they got wet. But the flip side's true. Now, he's in Florida. It gets pretty hot, but it does get pretty hot in Oklahoma too, last time I checked.
I mean, we've already had 90 plus. We've already had some 100-degree days here in Oklahoma. And
so he said that whenever it gets hot, they've got some great videos of this, that the poults will just lay down and pant. And I mean, they've had to from a university research perspective, obviously they have a responsibility for animal welfare. So they've had to intervene at times and move those animals into cooler places. Well, if they didn't intervene, they probably would have died. And so what that's telling me is, okay, we probably need to have brooding cover that's not only in open areas, and I talk about it a lot in open areas, but you probably also want some in the woods. You probably also want some open burned woods. And the cross timbers to me would be a perfect place to, for management of that. But even in western Oklahoma, I think there's a need to have, obviously you got to maintain those woods for roosting, but I think there is a need to have areas, either on the edges or, in some blocks have some brooding cover in the woods to where, you've got some understory vegetation there. It's not too dense, but you at least have some shade so that they're not overheating. And then, you would just hope that the hen would select, okay, it's getting hotter, we're going to move into that versus being out in the middle of a wide open field.
Yeah.
Has he or anybody else that looked at like what are they looking for when it's hot like that? Is there a specific structure? Is it shrubs or is it?
Yeah, so I don't know of anybody that's looked at that specifically with turkeys in terms of selection, but just in terms of like the type of environment that would be more cooling, would tend to think of not a cedar thicket, where you don't have any airflow, but somewhere that you have overstory, canopy cover, but you still have open airflow. I mean, usually with other species that I've seen work with, that's been the type of place that they're selecting for.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that they would seek out shrub cover per se. I mean, they could use that, I think, to some extent. But I think more often than not, they're going to need to be in a place with some overstory trees, because she's also, a hen's not going to want to be in a place with a bunch of shrub cover where she can't see to detect predators.
Yeah. Interesting. We didn't talk about roost tree preference. Do you mind talking about that for a little bit? Just what they're looking for? Yeah.
So most of the time we're thinking about, hardwood species that have a lot of lateral branching. And so, the classic one in western Oklahoma is cottonwoods, but really, turkeys can roost in any tree. They will roost in pines as well. Obviously they're not going to roost in cedar. You don't have that same lateral branching structure. But yeah, so there's been a little bit of work on roost tree preference. I don't know of much that's been done in most of the Great Plains. Most of the focus though really comes like the tree itself obviously is really important, but most of the focus of selection comes down to the structure at the ground as opposed to the tree itself. They want to have that lateral branching. Oftentimes they're associated with like a stream or or some sort of terrain feature that would allow them to fly up and down easier where that's available. But I think there's a pretty broad variety of different topography and tree types they'd roost in. The thing that's pretty consistent is they want a place where they can see all around them, and when they hit the ground, they aren't going to be ambushed by a predator. And so they want that open structure at ground level.
Yeah. So we often have like lots of elms and pecans and in addition to cottonwoods, any of those would work. Yeah.
Any of them that reach decent size and diameter and have some some branching structure. They don't. I think that the preference is more so about the structure of the tree and the structure of the vegetation, not necessarily the species.
Yeah. Cool.
But black locust, on the other hand, you might not see that many roost in.
Oh my gosh. I sure wouldn't want to sit next to a honey locust trunk. I was holy cow.
I know Laura's a big fan of the locust. So.
I have no love for any locust.
But that, it does seem like, especially this year, I have, in all my travels around the state and the area, definitely seen a lot more turkeys this year. For the last, about the last 3 years of traveling around, actually a good friend of mine that we were traveling around together doing some stuff, we were talking about that used to, on our trips, we would see turkeys all the time. And there for a couple of years, we didn't see any.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was covering all different parts of the state.
Mm-hmm.
But this year, I definitely saw that, and I've actually heard that I think we had a record harvest, I think, with turkeys here in the state this spring.
Yeah, several places had really great harvest this year, Oklahoma being one of them. But, yeah, I think there's – well, the reason being is a couple years ago had some excellent conditions that resulted in, a little bit better nesting success, a little bit better poult survival. So the number of poults that were on the ground that survived a couple years ago, was better than the average. So you certainly saw that little uptick in numbers, and the mechanism behind that is interesting. Could be weather in some places that certainly plays a role. There's also data to suggest in a few places that it actually kind of timed out with a cicada hatch. And so, you had emergence of all these cicadas. Obviously, that's going to be food for poults.
Yeah.
And so that was,
Eat them up.
Yeah.
I just eat them all.
and so, yeah, like there could be different things going on in different places. But I think the key thing is, when you have a single year with a bump in productivity, and 2 years later you're having great harvest rate, that tells you, okay, yeah, we just need to do some things to improve that.
But that also goes just exactly what you're saying is there's not one thing you can point a finger at that says this is the problem.
Correct.
It's multiple variables that come into effect of weather conditions, food availability, and that's all. And it's all about timing. Weather, predators. There's probably a big list of probably 20 things.
Yeah.
And you can't just go, well, if we did one thing, we're going to have turkeys, and it's like, not really.
Yeah.
It seems like sometimes folks get real focused on managing the predators, and I think what I hear you saying, Mark, is that like managing the habitat to allow turkeys to have the food that they need to be able to thermoregulate, but also to hide from those predators is equally, if not more important.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that certainly I'm not opposed to predator management. In fact, I mean, we've got a research project going on right now that is looking at predator management for turkeys, and so I think there could be a place for that. But I think if you zoom out and think about all the factors that have been going on over the last several decades, as we've seen turkey populations peak and start to decline, it's like, yeah, I think there's issues with hen survival and brood success, in particular, that we can probably fix with habitat, even with lots of predators. Now, certainly, I think you could see a bump in populations if beyond what habitat could do. Maybe if you paired habitat with mesocarnivore management, but I don't think that you're going to get that bump if you don't have habitat conditions, good baseline.
Yeah.
Because again, habitat management is predator management because you're making areas better for the turkeys to be able to avoid predators.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the thing is, everybody's always looking for the brass ring, the silver bullet. They want to do the one thing that'll do that, and it's just not there.
Yeah.
But I guess if you could leave people with something, what would be a key? I mean, what would be a key? Again, it's not the silver bullet, but it's probably one of the best things you could do for turkeys in your area.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has to be, using tools that decrease, woody plant cover in understory, not eliminating, but decreasing that, and then, promoting greater forb cover. And so I'd have to say, I mean, prescribed burning is pretty hard to beat for turkey management. And I think most places are not burning frequently enough. If they are really prioritizing turkeys in eastern Oklahoma, I'm going to say probably need to be burning about every 2 to 2.5 years. Western Oklahoma, obviously, you can lengthen that out as you get a little bit less rainfall and the vegetation response is slower. But especially in the far southeast part of the state, I mean, if you're not burning every 2 years, it's turning into a woody thicket pretty quickly. And so I think upping that frequency of fire is really important because, at the end of the day, I think hunters oftentimes rely on state agencies to fix problems. And with the case of turkeys, turkeys to me are pretty similar to quail. Sure, ODWC can do a great job managing habitat on the land that they control, on public lands, but that's a small percentage of the land in the state. And the same goes for any other state agency in the eastern half of the U.S. Whereas, private landowners control huge amounts of land, and many of them have wildlife objectives. And so, instead of thinking, okay, the state's going to fix this by either managing their WMAs better, which they're doing a great job of, or let's change regulations, which either barely change the amount of birds being harvested. I mean, decreasing the bag limit, for example, saves several hundred birds across the whole state of Oklahoma. Well, that's not really moving the needle in terms of increasing population productivity, et cetera, moving the season back. The data really aren't there right now to suggest that that's going to increase the population. And so what really needs to happen is a bunch of landowners, and even leaseholders that have the ability to work on properties where they lease or have permission to hunt. If those folks have interest in turkeys, quail, deer, et cetera, whatever, name a species, they need to just take the initiative to start improving habitat on those lands that they control, because the amount of impact we can have is going to be much greater, as opposed to just having the passive approach of thinking, the agency is going to fix this problem. They're going to do what they can, but they don't have control of all this, of all the private land in the state.
That's right.
And so I think, something that's exciting is just seeing the number of people that are interested and asking questions about, trying to improve ground for wildlife, in this state. That I think we're at a great time. People are recognizing that, there's a need to take more of an active role in management.
And yeah, I definitely see that. That's one of the numbers we keep track of. A lot of the burning that the local burn associations here in the state do. And we've actually been going back. We've been keeping track of that since about 2015. And one of the questions we ask we have an online burn entry form, trying to get good burn information about why people are burning and how much areas are getting burned from the burn associations and stuff. And what's really interesting is you can look back even let's say 2015, when we first started getting data. Managing wildlife habitat with fire was probably about 20% of the burns that were getting conducted. Cedar control is definitely number one for everything, but then livestock burning for livestock production was up there at about a little over 50% of all the burns that were done. Now, fast forward 10 years. Livestock production and wildlife habitat are neck and neck as reasons that people are burning. Because again, you can have multiple goals when you burn.
Sure.
And so they're both up there. And so it's really cool to see the amount of people that, even though probably years ago they were burning for wildlife, but they just didn't think about it. They just didn't mention it. It was just a passing. Yeah, if we burn, we see more turkey or we see more quail. Wasn't thinking about it. But now they are focused on that, and they see that, and it's a big part of their management goals and objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, just go light it on fire.
That's right. All right. Anything else? I
think that's about it.
Talk turkey.
Just ready for next spring now.
There we go. That's right. So, and I think it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully, we'll have a good hatch statewide and region-wide.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it'll be interesting to see that and to keep an eye on it and focus. And you're working with all the research projects, and we'll keep that in the loop and come back and visit that later.
Yeah.
So,
sounds good.
I wanted to mention, too, that we do have a fact sheet about converting fescue and other monocultures. So that's converting introduced grasses to rangeland. So if you want specific recommendations on that, you can find that on our extension page.
Absolutely. Yep. And there's also a fact sheet on management of ecology and management of the Rio Grande wild turkey. And there is soon to be, hopefully by the time this airs, one on ecology and management of the eastern wild turkey. So
Sweet.
very good. And I'll put my 2 cents in. There's lots of fact sheets on fire and how to use it and manage it and doing that. And
That's right.
That's a good part of it, so we can cover all the bases on everything that we can. So thanks for another great episode of Blazin, Grazin, and Other Wild Things.